US 5-year tips. 5-year tips gives you 179 in real terms. 10-year gives you 188, and 30-year gives you 205, right? So there is that built-in upward sloping, and interest rate is primary reason for that. Now, on top of this, we're going to add the inflation risk premium. Okay. Again, if inflation is expected to be lower in the short term, that premium is going to be lower. If it is expected to be higher in the long term, it's going to be higher, or vice versa. Right now, we expect that to be higher. So I'm going to add something to it. So maybe, let me use a different one. Let's make that green. That's the bump you get. This differential. That's the expected inflation for those maturities. Okay. If you calculated the break-even inflation for the 5 years, you're going to get about 240-ish. 10 years is going to be a little bit lower. 30 years is going to be even lower. So this is with added inflation. And if there are liquidity issues, in fact, I'm going to show you an example of that. Let's use black for that. This is liquidity premium. And if you're talking about corporate bonds, you could also put some sort of, let me use a red line, not red, but it's hot pink. Where's my hot pink? Come on. Typically, default risk is higher the longer is the maturity, because there's more time for the company to screw up, in a sense. Probably default risk for Apple would be almost nothing for a 6 months thing, but for a 30-year, it's going to be more than that. In a sense, you have the yield curve, you have a default spread yield curve as well. Those are the factors that pretty much determine it, right? But everything starts with the real yield curve. The reason I kind of talked about that, even with treasuries, there is a very well-known phenomenon in treasuries. It's called the new bond versus the old bond. With 30-year bonds, they're typically issued, I think, every quarter or so. When a 30-year bond is just issued, it's called the new bond, and it trades very actively. And 3 months later, a new one is issued. The old one becomes the old bond, and the liquidity on that kind of goes down. So there is actually, even though one of them is at 29.5 years or 29.75 years, the other is 30 years, it should not matter that much, right? But the old bond is not as liquid, so there's a premium to the new one. So the yield on the old one is a little bit higher. Somebody back in late 90s, and this guy was effectively almost single-handedly founder of the corporate bond market in the United States. It was Salomon Brothers that did that in mid 80s. Have you guys ever read the book Liar's Poker? You should. It talks about that trading room, and it is using some NSFW terms that I would like to use in the class, but I can't. I mean, I went to a military boarding school, okay? You can't get that out of a guy. When we get together, back home, and this summer I'm gonna go. We never ever invite our girlfriends or wives to those meetings because we put Marine drill sergeants to shame. Let me put it that way. Suddenly, we all become these 55 to 60-year-old guys. They act like 17-year-old kids because that's where we left off. We don't know anything that happened in between. Uh, what was I talking about? Oh, the Solomon Brothers. The guy who headed that department was named John Meriwether. He was a legendary bond trader. In 90s, he started a hedge fund called Long-Term Capital Management. And one of the things they have done a lot with a lot of leverage was to buy the old bond and short the new bond. Okay, because there's a difference in the yields. You make a little bit, but if you can leverage that 100 times, you make a lot of money. The trouble is sometimes that spread is gone. And back in summer of '98, in August, Russia defaulted. Okay, they called it a moratorium on foreign currency payments. That's a fancy way of saying if you're gonna be paid in ruble, even though we owe you dollars, you're more than welcome you, but we don't have any dollars to pay you back. And when stuff like that happens, there's a phenomenon in the markets called flight to quality. People want to invest their stuff into liquid stuff. So suddenly there was a big, because normally that spread between old and bond, it goes away within 3 months or so, when the new becomes old. So after those 3 months, you made that spread 100 times, you make a lot of money. That was the entire hedge fund trade. And suddenly that premium of the new has jumped up quite a bit. And these guys were effectively bankrupt. Fed actually had to come in and save them. If they had not, the entire US financial system would have collapsed because it was banks like JP Morgan, or it was just Chase those days, or Bear Stearns, or Lehman Brothers that were funding those trades. If those guys couldn't make those payments, those banks, and these were huge amounts, in hundreds of billions of dollars. Total assets of Lehman back in '98 was probably 200 billion. If you couldn't collect on 100 billion of that, you'll go down. And they eventually did for other reasons in 2008, but sometimes that pattern is gone. So it's not there, it's not guaranteed. And one of the things Greenspan have done right, he decided, I'm not going to let this thing collapse the entire world financial system, because it's like dominoes. If Bear Stearns doesn't have the money, he funds, they fund themselves from somebody else, those guys. So it's going to be like everybody would have gone down. And you would have thought that Great Depression was a picnic if that was allowed to happen. Unfortunately, of course, long-term capital management ownership is completely wiped out, but the investors, not the investors, but the lenders were protected. And to see that there's kind of a peculiar thing going on, let me show you that, and I'll send you guys home. In fact, we have only 4 minutes left. Let me go to marketswatch.com because they get a better picture. If I pick rates and then okay, let's look at it. The 10-year yields 418, right? And well, it's not here. It used to be. They changed it. What's interesting is 20-year bonds are yielding higher than 30-year bonds. What's the difference between 10-20 versus 20-10? Not much. But 20-year bonds are not as liquid, so they command a little bit higher yields. That's where the liquidity premium comes in. Uh, I'm gonna post your quiz pretty much in the next 15 minutes. Remember, you're gonna have until end of this Friday to do it, at least one attempt. You can do as many as you want. Then after you guys come back from spring break, your homework is gonna be with your Jeopardy group. And the idea is every member has to do at least one attempt. And your groups of 4, that means you would have seen somewhere between 12 to 16 at a minimum, if everybody has done only once. Numerical open answer questions. You're going to pick 6 of those, solve them in Excel as if I assign you those problems, and do a video of you solving those. But you're going to do that as a group. And after you come back, I'll give you guys about 4 days to do it. And after that, I will reopen the quizzes. If you're not happy with what you've done before the homework, you can have 2 more days to do as many attempts as you want again. But if you haven't done a single attempt on the previous one, you don't get to do any attempts after. And I will ask you guys who contributed to that. So there's not going to be free riding. Trust me, they're going to rat on you so bad because it's going to be anonymous. That's why I always hated that in college. You do a group work, and 2 out of 4 doesn't do anything, but just to save yourself, you do all the work. If I had the opportunity to rat on them, I would have, even though that was completely against the code in our high school. I'll see you guys Wednesday. Remember, Jeopardy on Wednesday. Don,